Hey, hello everyone. Hi, I'm Heather Moran. I'm the CEO here at 6th and I. And whether you're here with us in person or watching virtually from home, on behalf of 6th and I and our partner Politics and Prose, thank you so much for being here with us tonight, for your support of a nonprofit and an independent bookstore. Yay! So raise your hand if it's your first time here. Oh, welcome. We love new folks. We love folks that come back too. But since there are so many new people, I'd love to share a little bit about this incredibly special place that we're in. This building dates back to 1908. It was a synagogue for 45 years, and then home to an AME church for the next 50. When the church relocated and put the building up for sale, the highest bid was from someone who wanted to turn it into a, who knows? Louder, come on. A nightclub. And there's no denying that it would have made a great nightclub, but this historic building was saved within 24 hours. We're actually coming up on our 20th anniversary in April, and since our founding, 6th and I has served as a center for arts, entertainment, ideas, and Jewish life. Our aim is to inspire more meaningful and fulfilling lives through an unexpected mix of experiences that embrace the multifaceted identities of all of those we serve. So whether we're offering a class on the Torah of Taylor Swift, or hosting a conversation about the importance of friendship like we did earlier in the week with a packed house, or investigating the impact of tech on our lives with the foremost expert of our time like we are tonight, yep. Our deepest hope is that you feel welcome while you're here, that you walk away feeling entertained, inspired, or even a little more informed than when you arrived. And most of all, we hope you come back. So thank you all again, both here and at home, for joining us. And please help me welcome Brad Graham, my friend, and the co-owner of Politics and Prose, a treasured partner of 6th and I from our earliest days, who will introduce our guest tonight.
Thank you, Heather. Let me just say how much we at P&P truly love holding events in this place because, as you all can see, it's such a spacious and an elegant venue. And we're so excited for this evening's event with Kara Swisher, who's had such a successful career chronicling the tech industry for 3 decades. Kara went from reporting on tech initially for the Washington Post to becoming the Wall Street Journal's first reporter dedicated to covering the internet, putting her own entrepreneurial talents to work. She went on to create various tech news websites, produce leading conferences, and host several hit podcast shows. Along the way, her frequent news scoops, together with her tough interviews and bold, brash style, made her a media force to be reckoned with. Over time, too, she shifted roles from reporter to analyst and sometimes advocate, often finding herself in position to share her views, not just with the public, but privately with the tech titans she has come to know so well. Now, in her new work, Burn Book, Kara takes a blistering look back at the leaders of the digital revolution in an industry that, for all its world-changing innovations and promise to build a better world, also is having to account for a lot of societal damage: the spreading of misinformation, the amplifying of abuse, the invading of privacy, the amassing of unchecked power. Kara describes herself as having become, in recent years, less of a chronicler of the internet age and more of its cranky Cassandra. Her book, she has said, is intended to warn against repeating the corporate and governmental missteps of the past, so that in dealing now with such emerging powerful technologies as artificial intelligence, better and more thoughtful choices and decisions will get made. The book is chock full of anecdotes and backstories drawn from Kara's years immersed in the tech world, and its frankness and breeziness makes it a very lively and entertaining read, even if the underlying message of a revolution gone awry is itself disquieting. Now, in conversation with Kara will be Laurene Powell Jobs, the widow of Apple co-founder Steve Jobs and an accomplished and exemplary business leader and philanthropist in her own right. Among her credits, Laurene founded and presides over Emerson Collective, an organization that uses investing, philanthropy, and advocacy to focus on environmental justice, health, immigration, and education. Through Emerson, too, Laurene owns a new building at the Wharf here in D.C., and the building houses the Atlantic Magazine, which she also owns. And I mention this only because P&P's Wharf branch just relocated to that same building at the invitation. We moved there at the invitation and with the help of Emerson Collective, so full disclosure, Laurene is now my landlord. I think that's pretty cool. And it's also very cool for Laurene to be moderating this evening because Kara has interviewed her publicly, and it's time now for the tables to be turned. So please give a warm welcome to Kara and Laurene.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to... Bradley, turn around. She's not a business person in her own right, or the widow of Steve Jobs. She's an amazing entrepreneur and someone else. So I don't mean to be rude, but Mark Benioff did that once, and I slapped him back to last Sunday. So.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's
you've done
true.
amazing things. That's why I picked Laurene, because she's an astonishing entrepreneur and investor. I mean,
Fantastic.
I've heard of Steve Jobs, but who is he? Whatever. I'm kidding.
He was great, too.
He was, yes.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here tonight and to talk with the great Kara Swisher about her new book, Burn Book. As a reporter and innovator, Kara brings her entrepreneurial spirit to her work, and it's allowed her to tap into her innate skill to see around corners and see beyond immediate horizons. From early in her career, Kara anticipated how different the future would be and observed early on that everything that could be digitized would be digitized. Her book, as Brad said, is an entertaining blend of memoir and history and brings to mind Kierkegaard's famous observation that life must be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. So we don't know what our future will hold, but we are better prepared if we understand the path we took to get here. So Kara, welcome.
Yes.
I'm very
Thank you.
excited
Good
for
to
this
see you.
conversation. So I want to begin with the title of this book.
Yeah.
So as far as I know, Burn Book came into lexicon because of the film Mean Girls.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Just so we're clear on her cultural touchstones. And so it essentially means a book where you burn or dish on others. Mm-hmm. But she modified the title with a subtitle, which is A Tech Love Story. Mm-hmm. So, Kara, which one is it? Which tone did you want to set?
Well, it's both of them because I just want to say last time Laurene and I were on stage, we were at Lesbians Who Tech, and she was a huge hit. I interviewed her there.
And I got a great
That was
sweatshirt.
fun. That
Yeah.
was fun. That was a good time. Lesbians Who Tech are fun lesbians.
No, it was,
Anyway, Burn Book. It's because burn books are actually true. I mean, that's the thing about burn books, and if you watched, it's in the theaters now, the latest Mean Girls with Renee Rapp, who really is fantastic. And they're often true. It's what you really think of people, and that outside in social life, you do niceties. You're like, oh, hello. But then you go, oh, that jerk, and they did this. And so it's actually true, even if it's mean or catty or gossipy, but it's never untrue. Burn books aren't. So that's one of the things. The other part, the part about the love story, is because the reason I'm not angry, I wouldn't say, although Elon said I had a heart seething with hate.
We'll get to him.
Yeah, look in the mirror, fella. That's what I say. I love tech. You know that. I've always loved tech. The minute I started using it, I was deeply in love with it. I talk about it in the book, about grabbing the giant suitcase phone of the Washington Post and running around with it. And people made fun of me. Someone here in the room always used to make fun of me, Lisa Dickey. I loved tech from the minute I had it. And that's why when Walt is the one that really got me to move to San Francisco, I was thrilled to do it because it was so up and to the right and so exciting, the stuff that was happening. Of course, you lived it too. And there was so much possibility. And one of the quotes I use, in fact, is from, I had this idea that you were either a Star Wars or a Star Trek person, right?
Yes.
And Star Wars is a very dark tale. It's really, it's a very dark tale of humanity. And evil wins.
It's good versus evil. I mean, you're always rooting for the resistance.
But evil wins
you're on
quite
your
a bit.
back foot.
Right, and in Star Trek, like I said, it's a Benetton commercial of space. Like they're all there running around, and it's really great, and everybody gets along. Villains turn, and I hadn't remembered the interview I had done with Steve, where he said he was talking about things that were starting to turn. I think it was about social media, which he didn't love. He didn't love the business plan of it, and he said, "I want Star Trek." That's what I want. And when I saw that, and I thought, that's right. I want Star Trek. I love Star Trek. And we're living in a Star Wars universe with a bunch of men, young adult men who act like toddlers, cosplaying Darth Vader. And, that pisses me off. It pisses me off, I guess. And so it's a love story gone wrong.
Yeah. We better make sure it's in the right section of the bookstore.
Yeah, right.
But
Self-help.
Speaking of love, you dedicate the book to Walt Mossberg, the great tech journalist, and so this is an opportunity to give a little love to Walt. So tell us a little bit about your partnership, because you had such a special, long-standing partnership with Walt.
Indeed, Walt was I met Walt writing my book on AOL because he and I have the same mindset. Because he had written a column I really thought was great. He talked about seeing around corners. Walt really did, and he also was a great reporter, which is very different. There's so many pontificators. Walt did the reporting and then came to a conclusion, and you either agreed. People didn't agree with him. He used to get in big fights with Gates. All of them would call him, but he said what he thought, which I thought was a great thing. But he did it after doing reporting, and it was his point of view. And so he wrote this column on AOL. At the time, there were better funded businesses, Prodigy being one of them, which was Sears and IBM was an online service. And I had written, it was everything Sears knows about computing and everything IBM knows about retail. And so that was a good line. That's a good line. Yeah, that's a good line. And so he noticed that, and when I went to work on my AOL book, I called him. I said, this was exactly what I think. We met at a place that it was down in the basement on Connecticut Avenue, and we had French dips, I'll never forget. And it was like kismet when I met him. Like, we were just like this immediately. And he's the one that got me the job at the Wall Street. In fact, he insisted. He's like, I need you to go to San Francisco and deal with these people because they're going to run the world, and you need to be there to make sure they do it right. And he said, go in, parachute in with your cleats on, which I thought was painful, but okay, which I did. And he said, go and get the truth out of these people because they're going to run the world. And I did. He got me the job. He changed my life. I moved to San Francisco from here. I was working at the Washington Post. And and then we started business together because we also saw everything that happened, and we knew that newspapers were troubled, to say the least. And so we started All Things D within the Wall Street Journal together. And the reason we were allowed to start it was because he was so powerful there, because he wrote that tech column that made millions and millions of dollars every week for them. And so he's still here. He lives here in Potomac, and he's going to actually do a little interview with me tomorrow night at a book party. But
oh, how nice.
He's just a really special person, a mentor. He's kind, generous, talented, and he really, if I'm even slightly the amount that he was as a journalist, I would be happy.
Yeah.
So, and we did the conference together, and we did all those iconic interviews, including the very last one, which I did with you and Johnny Ive and Tim Cook. But we did all these iconic interviews over the years.
Yeah, you did.
And the most one being the Gates and Jobs interview, which I think was...
Yeah, that was great.
And the Mark Sweating interview, but that was good too.
Oh.
That was good.
Yeah, you write about it really beautifully.
Yeah. Yeah, it was beautiful to see. I actually have a hoodie that I'm going to auction off. You have to help me figure out what to give the money to. But
there's
I have
so many options.
the sweating hoodie. Yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, as you talk about San Francisco a little bit, you start your stories here when you moved to San Francisco in 1997. But of course, there was a lot of tech underway in the Valley for the 50 years prior to that. And I'm just going to walk through a couple of them. In 1939, HP was founded. In the 60s, we got Intel and other microchip companies. In the 70s, we had the flourishing of Xerox PARC, Atari, Apple, Oracle, Genentech, Adobe, the rise of venture capitalists, Microsoft in Seattle. In the 80s and 90s, we had Sun, Cisco, NVIDIA, Netscape, eBay, to say a few. So all of that predates even these stories here. But several of the people that you admire in the book, including Steve, came up during the 60s and 70s, steeped in that earlier world, particularly in the idealism that they saw at the intersection of technology and counterculture, or
100%.
Technology and humanities. And something that Steve said that I loved was, you can't understand what's happening today without understanding what came before.
Right.
And that certainly is the case with tech. So when you think about the 1960s through 90s, the growth of technology companies that really formed the foundation upon which everything else was built. When you think about those companies and those leaders, what stands out for you? And what of the values and the underpinnings of that era do you see are still existing today in the DNA of tech companies and the ethos of technology, and what do you think has been lost?
Well, a lot's been lost. I mean, I think one of the things that the deleterious effects of wealth is one of the things I think that I talk about a lot, that you have this happening. But before that, they were, as you recall, they were computer companies and they were chips companies. And there was sort of this, it was dramatic. The fight between Apple and Microsoft was a dramatic, one of those, there were dramatic stories there between them, with Bill Gates slowly amassing a fortune and control of that. But before that, it was all these companies that were built on each other, like the graphical user interface, which was from Xerox PARC, and it moved to that, and everybody started adding things into it. And it was sort of, things grew from each other. But when the internet was introduced, and both Apple and especially Microsoft was particularly flat-footed getting what was happening. When it became a communications network and not just a device network, it changed everything. It changed the whole thing, because you could then start to imagine it being more like electricity than anything else. Before it was, sometimes I think before the internet times, computers were much more of themselves, kind of thing. Afterwards, they are everywhere. It doesn't really matter what they are. And so, like tonight, I always joke, like, did you go, I'm on the electrical grid today? You don't. You don't.
Right.
Now the internet is like that. You're online. You're always online.
Yeah,
And so
it's like water.
it's like water. And so I think what happened was there were all these very hardworking people with a lot of values that were important, including counterculture values, changing things, and that was at Apple, that was certainly think different. I don't think it was just a marketing term. It was a marketing term, but it was more than that. And there was that ethos in the Valley. And then when the money started to come in, and I think it really did in that bubble, it was like a gold rush and all the negativity that brings with it. And so you had all these people starting things that were, I'd often go to meetings and they'd be like, and when I heard from some people, I believed it. Most people, I didn't. And I actually found some old articles I wrote in the Wall Street Journal. We're going to change the world, Kara. We're making a community, Kara. They spoke those words, but they didn't mean those words. And that was what I found increasingly irritating to listen to. And in fact, one of my first articles in the journal was things they say that aren't true, and I'll tell you what they actually are saying. And so one of them was, we have no titles here, Kara. As if they're the, the Communist Party here. And they all had different names. They never had them at the older, they didn't have it at Microsoft or Apple, but all these tech companies that I started covering when they were startups, Chief Yahoo,
Yes, that's
or
true.
Chief Fun Officer. There was one of those. And you're like, and the only person that ever, and I talked about this recently, that had a title I liked was Mark Zuckerberg had a card that said, I'm the CEO, bitch.
Oh, yeah,
Remember?
he did. Oh, yeah.
And everyone gave him a hard time, and I was like, I get it. I like that. That's good. You are the CEO. But what he would do almost continually was talk. He would call me, and he'd say, we're here to change things, and we want a community. We want to all decide together. And I said, great. Sounds good to me.
And do you think he was actually sincere?
No.
In that? Oh.
Not in any way. Because I said, well, you own all the stock and you have all the controlling stock and nobody can fire you, so it's not all of us, it's you. And that's what I was worried about, is the complete control these people had over very important issues increasingly, and their lack of experience to deal with what became societal issues, right? But they inserted themselves in everything, and now you're seeing it in kind of a comical way when venture capitalists talk about Ukraine. I don't care what venture capitalists care. This is what we should do in Ukraine. And I'm like, listen, person who invested in a digital dry cleaning service, sit down, right? Can you imagine Tim Cook? Tim Cook
weighing in on
Ukraine, Kara.
Yes.
He'd rather do almost anything else, honestly. That's where it's gotten to, but it started there.
There's this strange confidence that then bleeds over outside of the area of expertise.
Yeah, it's called frequently wrong, but never in doubt. Thank you. Yeah, more words. I'm really good with the words. I'm good with the words.
Do you think that though there are any core values that still persist from 50 years ago?
Yeah, I do. I mean, in certain companies, which is quality of design. Yes. I think Apple still exemplifies that. But look, they're old guys, right? They're kind of old guys there. Quality. There's certain companies. I very much like Satya Nadella at Microsoft. There's a couple of people. Quality. Actually talking about problems. Sam Altman, who you are, I think, good friends with. Yeah, I know. He's talking about the problems at the same time he's talking about the positives. Now, that never happens with a lot of them. Everything's always great and up and to the right, and they never talk about the dangers. So there is a thing of worrying about society, thinking about the implications, thinking about the consequences. And I do think that was a previous era, and then it got easily supplanted by people who had no interest in consequences or anticipating them. Like privacy. Yes. Privacy is a big issue, and you would, when you say anything to them about it, they'd be like, "Oh, you're old. You don't understand." And I'm like, "I understand surveillance. I understand." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But they would say, "No, everybody wants this," and just the preying on people and giving them things that were theirs anyway, and then having to thank them, that was a really strange shift.
Yeah, there's also a level of deceitfulness when you're harvesting people's personal data,
Yes.
monetizing it, and people don't really know what
No,
you're
they don't want you
collecting
to
on
know.
them.
And, you know, Walt called them, at one time with the Google guys, we were talking to them, and, you know, they're kind of goofy and that kind of thing during that period. So it sort of covers up a lot of sins, right?
Yeah.
And Walt, at one point in an interview, said, well, I think you're rapacious information thieves.
With a smile.
At first I thought, I bet they don't know what the word rapacious means. And I agree. They had a sense of them. Like that's a very good example. Again, very goofy and silly. And one of the things, and when you started to tell them what they were doing was wrong, it wasn't just Facebook. It was before that. It was before that. You know, the sucking up of information. There were two moments at Google that are in the book where I was walking around Google with Larry Page, and there was always something weird at Google. Something would pop out of the door. You know what I mean? Suddenly a guy in like a gorilla outfit, and you're like, okay, that sounds good. You know, or someone would be doing a pogo stick. That's another issue about juvenilization of these men. But one of the things, there was a dark room full of televisions, and he. I was like, what are they doing? What's the Circuit City doing here? You know, essentially. For those who don't remember, it was a store. And they had a wall of televisions. And I said, what are you doing? And he goes, taping television. And I was like, all of it? And he goes, a lot of it. And I'm like, do you have the rights to do that? Because it's copyright, right? I don't need the rights. I was like, you do need the rights. He goes, I don't need the rights. I go, you do need the rights. It's not yours. What he was doing is he was taking the closed captioning and using it for search. He did the same thing with books, you know, and then years later he tried to buy Yahoo. They tried to buy Yahoo and then tried to control Yahoo. And so that was enough. I was like, no, you can't do that. Because they would have had 96% of the market, which seems to be a lot to me. Yeah. And so I wrote a story. I've talked about this quite a bit because I think it was an important story. And I used a Dr. Seuss rhyme, would not, could not, have it all, or something like that. But at the end, I said, what's really irritating about these Google people is they with the colorful balls and the pogo sticks, at least Microsoft knew they were thugs. Because that's what it was thuggish what they were doing.
Yeah.
And
in this way, they were disarming.
Disarming, right. And so one of them called me, and I honestly don't remember, because at some point they became one person to me. You know what she knows. She knows. Which one are you? They called me and they said, you know us, Kara, we're really nice people, right? We're really nice people, Kara. We're not thugs. You know us. We're not evil. We said it in our saying, you know, don't be evil. And I said...
And they weren't. They weren't evil.
They weren't, of course not. And I said, I think you're nice. I'm not scared of you.
It's the next one.
I'm not scared of you. I'm scared of the next person coming. And the next person is bad. And I mistakenly quoted Yeats, where I said, there is a rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem, waiting to be born, and they're coming. And, of course, it must have been Larry. He was like, beast? What beast? I'm like, the one slouching towards Bethlehem. They're waiting to be born. And then I'm like, forget it. A bad person is coming. And that was I worried about. And in a lot of ways, it was in the form of all this misinformation now, whether it's Russia, China, Trump, whatever, all the election lies.
Yes, exactly. Yes. A lot of this great book is filled with stories about individuals and companies, but also a quiet hum in the background of the book is the presence of government and politicians. And Kara makes a strong point that social media companies have thus far been spared any meaningful legislation or regulatory oversight in the United States. And I wonder if you can explore a little bit here what you think is the right role of government today to encourage the best and slow the worst tendencies that are emerging and existing in in tech systems.
Well, you exemplify an attitude of tech. I mean, most of the attitudes of tech from the early days, and we had Bill Gates here to the Washington Post many years ago for one of those lunches that we had, and he went on and on about government shouldn't touch anything, there shouldn't be any government intervention, which was a very typical attitude, right, among techies.
And I think also early on, when you have a new technology, you don't know how the platform is going to evolve. And so what's supposed to happen is that there's supposed to be a dynamic range of guardrails that are instituted, but that has never developed.
It's never happened at all. And so one of the things whenever I go into crowds, I'm like, how many laws do you think react specifically to the internet? Just the way airlines have them, or insurance companies, or the banks, zero. There's zero. It's astonishing. And the one that exists helps them. It gives, which I wrote about for the Washington Post, which is the Communications Decency Act, had a part in it called Section 230, that they can't be sued. They can't be sued. They're not regulated, and they're the richest people in the world. Like, how do you think that's going to turn out, right? And so, and it also creates a situation that there's no privacy laws, there's no algorithmic transparency laws, there's no antitrust laws. I mean, poor Amy Klobuchar and I talk all the time, and she's like, "This year, Kara, I'm going to do it." I'm like, "You're not." She promises me on stage. She's a tremendous legislator, right? She really is.
Yeah, she keeps
works
trying.
She works it. She doesn't, just the very basics of things. And in that case, if you really care about innovation, as I do, and I think you do, how can there be innovation right now for the next group of computing when AGI is controlled by the most powerful company? Where are the small companies that are going to unseat them? The whole ethos of Silicon Valley is the young eating its old, like that there's unseating and there's change and there's constant. You can't create anything when it's controlled by, as much as I like Satya Nadella, Microsoft or Facebook or wherever. You can't create innovation without any guidelines. And in this particular technology that's coming is dangerous.
Yeah.
It's more dangerous than ever.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'm curious about your thoughts around reforming Section 230, so please feel free to weigh in about how social media should be at least have some oversight and some regulation and accountability. But then I also want us to talk a little bit about whether we're having the right conversations about AI.
It's interesting because all they do with Congress is have bipartisan commissions to talk about it, or they have hearings or whatever. That's great. I think learning is great, and it's really nice. But at this point, we kind of know, right?
There was the recent testimony, social media.
Yes, that was with Mark, which is another topic, which I'll talk about in a second. But the problem is a global issue. This is like nuclear weapons. This is like nuclear weapons, and we're not treating it or cloning or any one thing or Jennifer Doudna, CRISPR. Like, what are we going to do about that as a group? What decisions are we going to make together? And unfortunately, all the decisions are being made by private companies. And as much as I love it, the first line of the book is, so it was capitalism after all. Yeah. But that's because it was. This is what it was. They're not here. It is. And one of the things that I don't mind private companies, but they should not be determining, should we have killer robots? I feel like that shouldn't be decided by Mark Zuckerberg. I feel that it shouldn't, Nice guy, and he likes MMA fighting, but no, you cannot decide this. And I think our public officials have to, as broken as our system is, we elect them, right? Yeah. That's the thing. And so we should have an idea of what we want. We should I think the Biden executive order is pretty good, around safety, around preserving innovation, around making sure that there's not, one of the issues is what the data is and what what it could do for discrimination and bias. Those are big issues. I'm real concerned with lots of things. We don't know what it's going to be, what's going to happen. Yeah. Like, here's a silly example, and you say to the AI, which is going to take over everything, by the way, that your AI and my AI are going to talk to each other at some point, and it's going to run a lot of things. So what if we say to the AI, hunger, we have to get rid of hunger? What if it says, well, if we kill 1 billion people, that'll work, and then goes off and kills 1 billion people? Like that for them, it's logical. So what are the strictures? And that's just a crude example. Like, that's not going to happen. But it is a concept of, like, where does humanity stick into this thing?
Yes, that is the question.
So if it's made by a small group of homogeneous people,
Yes.
it is not going to be good. It's not going to be good for women. It's not going to be good for people of color. It's not going to be good for marginalized communities. And I'm not being all woke here. It's just not. It's simply not. And you cannot have a diverse, interesting development of this stuff without...
If you don't have a diverse, interesting group
That's
of
right.
people who are actually writing the code.
Correct. Yeah.
So what do you think should be done now and in the next several years?
Well, Sam has talked a little about this. It is up to the regulators to do something about it rather than having meetings. You could have safety issues, requires safety around the data sets, the provenance of where the data is coming from, copyright enforcement. Right now, the New York Times is suing OpenAI. I think someone else sued them today. I forget. But all kinds of things can be taken from you without your permission. And that's what happened the first time, by the way. But this is real theft. This is, talk about real information thievery. One of the things that just happened to me with this book is you go to look up Kara Swisher, and there's 20 AI biographies written by me that aren't me, that are pictures of me, and very femmy pictures of me. You go look for them. There's a story about it. And so AI generated books, because my book was for sale and it was doing well, and it knew that it was doing well initially. And
where are these fake books?
Amazon.
No.
Yes, Laurene, they're on Amazon, and I really am disturbed by them. So one of the things they did, they're AI-generated books that are $16.99. I was just with Savannah Guthrie. She's written a hit book on faith and God. Someone created a workbook from AI, and Amazon is selling them together. Savannah had nothing to do with it.
Oh my goodness!
And it looks like it's her book,
sure.
Right? Instantly, they just flood news. They flood the zone right now with news. Like when things happen, sites like HelloNews.com just come up, and AI-generated news happens. Now the real news does surface eventually by real outlets, but the flooding of the zone is a classic technique of fascists, to flood the zone with confusion. So on this AI thing, I wrote the CEO of Amazon. I'm like, what up, dude? And they're like, oh, we're going to take them down for you. And I'm like, I'm not talking about me. What about everybody else?
Right.
Like, great, my boat, I got pulled out of the ocean here. But
this may be happening to every single
But think about what
New
you
York
could
Times
do for
bestseller.
everything and take information
Right.
and make it totally confusing. That's just a small little taste of what could come.
That's one example. And so clearly the right conversations are not happening.
They aren't. They aren't because because a lot of these tech companies have a lot of money and a lot of lobbying, and the ones that are for privacy are like one. Apple is. Apple's the only one who talks about privacy because that's not their business, right?
No,
so
that's right. It's not part of their business.
It's not part of their
model.
business plan. So these business models are oriented towards taking your information and not asking permission for it, and then selling it back to you and asking for your welcome.
Money.
Yeah.
Okay, so now something fun for all of us. Tell us one story that you were tempted to put in the book, but you didn't.
Oh. Well, so many. One of the things I tried to respect was when people did tell me things were off the record, I did not want to put them in. And some of them, I wish I could have, right? But I feel like I should stick with it. And, a lot of it is personal stuff, and that's another thing I tend to shy away from, a little bit, like what they were personally like. I was going to write more about Elon's drug use. I knew quite a bit about it. The Wall Street Journal did a series of very good articles because I think when people are asking me what happened to him, I think it's one of the elements. And you should read the Journal's article. It's quite good, and it links money and influence to it in a way that's very responsible, I think. I was going to write a little bit more about how some of these people have lost the narrative and gone quite conspiracy theory. And I wrote
That is interesting.
It is, and I wrote a little bit about it. I'm trying to think of. I knew a lot of their dating habits I didn't put in here. I guess I'm trying to think. I wrote less about, personal. I knew a couple of them had drinking problems and things like that.
Yeah,
I just left those out, and they were important, but I thought I don't need to do that.
So, if you're not going to
Personal
divulge,
stuff.
Yeah, we don't want to know personal
No.
stuff. But I
don't know anything about you.
I'm curious about.
Actually, I do. That's not true. A little bit.
I am curious about your take, not only Elon, but their whole group of men who used to be quite reasonable and people you could engage with and had common sense and had a sense of self-deprecation, who have really turned the corner and take themselves and their conspiracies very, very seriously.
They do.
What do you think was the inflection point?
I don't know. Elon's really the king of them, right? But there's a whole lot of them. And it's really, Mark Andreessen, I think, has really lost the narrative in a way. Someone, actually, Dustin Moskovitz, who was one of the Facebook founders, he gives away, he's pretty progressive. He's a very progressive kind of guy. And he was saying, it was really interesting because Elon started off charming and is now looks like a clown, and everyone thinks Mark's a clown and he's actually really charming, which was interesting. Mark, I don't count among these people, by the way. I think he's actually a relatively affable person and a very nice man in that regard. But and I corrected him. I go, charming is doing a lot of work here for Mark, but because he's awkward and stuff like that. But one of the things that happened is you're right. Elon's the perfect example of that. He's funny. He was funny. People are always like, I get a lot of like, how dare you used to like him? I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. He was interesting. You've met him. He was funny. He had a little small. He had 10% of his personality was dank memes, penis and boob jokes. That was there the whole time, and you just sort of went and then moved on. But it wasn't his personality, and the stuff he was doing, whether it was space or cars, was really exciting, and again, everybody else was doing stupid things, right? Not big ideas.
Yeah.
So when someone did big ideas, you paid notice, because most of them were doing small ideas.
No, he took big swings.
Big swings at big things, and was interesting, and of course he had narcissism. They all do, like essentially. And so he had that level of, I don't know what happened. There's two moments, and I'll use him as an example and then get to the broader group of them, which was during, before, when Tesla was going through a really troubled period. He was sleeping on the factory floor doing that thing, and which I thought was ridiculous and performative. I'm like, there's a motel next door. Really? You need to sleep on the factory floor or else. But he literally said, if I didn't sleep there, it would have been over. Like, he'd say things like that. I'm like, are you like in a video game I'm not aware of or something? And then he said to me, and I'll never forget this, he said, if Tesla doesn't survive, humanity is doomed. And I was like, really? Wow, it's a car, right? Like, what the fuck? Can you imagine Steve saying that? If the iPod doesn't make it, he would
humanity.
Humanity is doomed. So dramatic. Like,
wow,
I was like, all right, fine, I'd cut back on whatever you're smoking there. But he did that, and he got through that, and then did the rocket stuff, which was cool, like really friggin' cool. And even the Hyperloop thing was cool. Even if it's like kind of wacky, it's kind of cool.
It is.
It's a great idea.
Yeah,
Tunnels under cities.
Starlink is a great idea.
Starlink, when he told me about that, I thought that was brilliant. And so there were all these brilliant things. And then COVID. I have to say, COVID was a real moment. We were doing an interview, and he was... you could see he was rattled. He's very, and he's talked about his emotional struggles in the New York Times and different places. And so he was really rattled by COVID, and he had hit back at the California government over closing down his thing. It was the very beginning of COVID. Nobody knew anything. But he started to say, the man is trying to stop. He started to use terms like that. And I kept thinking, you're the man. Because they're not the man, you're the man. Okay. And he started talking like that. And in the middle of the interview, and I argued with him, and he said, COVID's not going to be a big deal. Nothing's going to happen. I've read all the studies. And I was like, really? You're an expert in this area. How nice to know that you know everything about science and epidemiology. But he said, I know about it. And I was like, okay. I think I called him Einstein. I go, thanks, Einstein. But no, we're not going to let you determine this. And I thought he was being ridiculously belligerent to them. And he threatened to leave the interview, which he had never done, which I thought was interesting. I could leave here. I'm like, well, leave here then. And he goes, I could leave here. I go, go. It was like this ridiculous. And he goes, well, I might. And I go, okay. What do you want? And it was so stupid. And then he calmed down. And I thought, oh, he must be going through one of his diggity dogs thing. And so it was weird. It was weird. And then he started going off after he got Twitter. Just something happened. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But it moved right down to conspiracy theories. And then when he did the Paul Pelosi thing, it was unforgivable, which was to
such a low.
Paul Pelosi got beaten up by a crazy person who had been radicalized by online QAnon, and he, as the owner of Twitter, the first thing he did, because we were talking about things to do at Twitter before that, in the weeks before. I thought he might do a good job. I did. It wasn't out of the realm of possibility. He could have done an interesting job here.
Well, his other companies were
He could have, right? And so he tweeted a thing that said it was a gay love triangle, and that it was sickening. It was sickening, absolutely sickening. And then that was not even the worst since then. Then the anti-Semitic stuff that he tweets and then pretends he's not tweeting, that he's not supporting. He is. And then you have all these stands around him saying he's not anti-Semitic. I'm like, I'm sorry. He told someone that replacement theory was the real truth. What?
Yes.
And then of course sometimes he's only kidding. He's trying to get people just asking questions in that Tucker Carlson zone. I don't know what happened to him, but there's a whole group of people around him that are now like that, that don't trust the government, even though every one of them got a government loan and every one of them have government contracts, then give back the money, Elon, essentially. Or the rest of them, they don't trust government. They think that he's sort of the Peter Thiel character, who is sort of the ringleader of that group. They don't go to college. Education's not important. Nobody knows, no experts know anything. The media is out to get you. It tracks with Trump, right?
Yeah,
it tracks a lot with Trump, and all politicians are terrible, corrupt. Some are, some aren't, and it's really quite an ugly dystopian way to look at the world, and it's troubling because they're the richest people on earth, some of them. I don't know. How do you look at it? You run a progressive organization. How do you look at it?
At what has happened?
Yeah.
I think your explanation is as close as anybody's going to get. There's something that changed in the way people are thinking and processing information, and it's very different from it was a few years ago.
It's unkind, is what it's unkind.
Yeah, there is a malevolence underneath it.
It's contrarianism for contrarianism's sake. They've taken it too. I think one of the great things, that early Apple and some of these other companies did is let's try something different, right? But it was always in the spirit of moving forward. Now it's everything is wrong, and we're going to, move fast and break things. Think about that statement. It's a technology statement, but it's not what I noted in the book is it's not move fast and fix things. Yeah. It's not move fast and change things. It's move
make
fast
a better
and
world.
Break them.
Yeah.
They like to break, and that's what a toddler does. So. Or at least my toddler does.
Kara,
Just this morning.
What comes to mind if I say what's one consequential thing in tech that you got wrong?
Oh, so many things.
Or missed.
On the list. Not a lot, I'll be honest. Honestly. Facebook's valuation, I thought, was ridiculous at the time. when Microsoft valued it at $15 billion, because I was living in the old world of profits should meet revenues, and, that kind of stuff. So that was, I got that wrong. But they grew into their valuation, and they have a great business, right? They have a great business. Not every. I was more positive towards Amazon because I understood retail, and I knew they would grow into their valuation. I thought eBay was stupid, and then it was big for a while, but now it's not. So whatever, I was right in the end.
It's still going, though.
It is going. It's hopping along there, but they're not exactly setting the world on fire. I think I was early to AI, the importance of AI. I wrote about a lot. I think I probably. I'm trying to think of something. I thought AirPods were ugly initially, but now I love them so much I can't stand it. I think I said that to Tim. I'm like, these are really ugly. What's happening here? I hope I'm not wrong about Vision Pro because I love it, but
I hope you're not wrong too.
Yeah, I like it. Whatever.
Yeah. In the book, you quote Nobel laureate Maria Ressa when she talks about the marriage of technology and journalism and creating communities of action. And I think also in the book, you weren't quite convinced that that marriage should happen. But then you write, as the dangers of the tech world and its endless power have only grown larger, you now agree with her. So how do you think about the responsibilities as a journalist and threading that line between advocacy and journalism?
Well, it's interesting because I'd already made that journey when I left the Wall Street Journal. I was a beat reporter, and you just do the news, like this happened yesterday. When we started All Things D and then later Recode, we had a point of view. We started to have a point of view towards things like, this is too much, this is not happening. We had a very heavy point of view, for example, on Ellen Powell and the trial, Kleiner-Perkins trial. We took a point of view that this was wrong, you know what I mean? And we said so, and we oriented our coverage towards it. And so one of the things that Walt and I decided is like reported analysis of what we were doing. I don't know if it's advocacy precisely, but I think probably there were all these little lines, the privacy violations started to get really troubling and dangerous. When I had that interview with Mark about Holocaust deniers, which I thought was the most important interview I did, which was he said Holocaust deniers. I'll just tell them very briefly.
Tell that story.
We were doing an interview, and it was after the sweating one. He decided to do another one with me, mistake on his part. And then he said, we'll do it at my office. And I'm like, sure, you're still in trouble. I don't really, okay. They feel safe in their office, but that's like sort of like, come in, cheetah. Like, sure, I'll come in too. And so we went there. I went there with just a single producer, and we started talking, and it was about misinformation, which I think is just propaganda under a different name. And I wanted to know about Alex Jones. I had it with Alex Jones on that platform. This heinous piece of shit was talking about was breaking the rules of Facebook over and over again. Like over and over again. They never kicked him off.
They didn't kick him off the platform.
And I was like, hey, you have rules. Why don't you kick him off? Well, it's very complicated. I go, you have rules. Why do you have rules? Don't have rules. Like, I don't understand it. So he was sort of getting into trouble with me because he could see I was furious as a parent, especially. It's like, what are you doing? Your platform, not just platforming someone, he broke your rules. That's it. And I think I was like, this guy is coming into a city and taking his shit in the park every day. And I'm, as a concerned citizen, I'd like him to stop. Like, can you please get rid of him?
Yes.
And he was like, unfortunately for him, because again, I hate to say this, he's a nice person. Like, you've met him. He's a nice person.
Sure.
He's not gone down conspiracy highway. He's just, doing his MMA fighting, whatever.
Yeah, but they have 2 billion users.
Yes, exactly. He's very powerful, let me just say. So he starts to go, he goes, let's switch to Holocaust denial. And I was like, first of all, that was my minor in college. So I was like, excellent. Like, the uses of propaganda in Nazi Germany. I was like, all right.
Perfect preparation.
I know, exactly. And I was like, oh, okay, we're going to go there. Ooh, this isn't going to be good for you. And this is me in my head. And he goes, when I think you should go listen to this because it's quite something. And he goes, a lot of people feel that I should kick them off, but I don't feel like maybe they don't mean to lie. He said this, Holocaust
They
deniers
don't mean
to lie. And so I was like, so there was a moment, this was the greatest moment in my career, I have to say, because I wanted to say, you fucking idiot. Like, they mean to lie. It's their job description, like, is they lie about one of the absolute serious things. And this happened, and they're trying to make people believe it didn't happen. This is the most awful thing you could do. And so I said to him, I go, I think they mean to lie, but why don't you tell me what you think? And I didn't say anything else, and I let him spool it out for, I don't know, 5 minutes, and it was so nonsensical and stupid and not thought out. And this was a guy in charge of the population.
Yes.
That was what it was. And I was like, why are you running this place if you don't understand it? And my producer and I, this young guy, looked at each other, and he didn't realize what he was saying, like how badly he came off.
Yeah.
And I wasn't trying to catch him. I just wanted people to see that he didn't know what he was doing, and he was in charge of something so important, that all this toxic waste was flowing through the system, and he thought it should just go right through and poison our world. Yeah. And I was like, okay, and I published it, and of course, he had gotten huge trouble, and he had to apologize and everything else. Never done an interview since. But
they did a lot of apology tours.
They do. That's their favorite thing. 2 years later, he took them off. Now, 2 years, if you want to understand why anti-Semitism is on the rise, 2 years. That it took him the penny to drop in the head of Mark Zuckerberg. 2 years. That's 2 years of more and more. And it's not just, garden variety anti-Semitism. It moves deeply into the brainstem. It's a different kind of ability to scale and make it the worst, even worse, and harden it among certain populations. And I find that unforgivable that he didn't. If you make rules, you kick them off. So that was a moment, and the Trump thing was a moment for me when they all went.
To Trump
and this
Tower.
is an area that you have been doing a lot of great work on immigration issues, which now are just speaking. I'm thinking of the meetings we had talking about this. Now it's just become. It's worse. It's absolutely worse.
It's a lot worse.
It's including, especially how people feel about immigration. And I felt they went to these executives went to Trump Tower, and it was a scoop I had, but they didn't tell anybody they were going, and they slid in the back, and I wrote the news story that they were going, and they did not publicly say anything about him talking about Muslim ban, immigrants are rapists, all his terrible comments about it. And they went in there and were part of the richest and most powerful people were part of a photo app that organized by Peter Thiel. And that was it for me. I think that was I was like, that's enough with these people. They're not here to save us. They're here to take for themselves.
Yeah.
So, that's friendly. I really
so
like the
good.
Vision Pro. Did I tell you that? I love technology. I do.
I know you do. See the subtitle.
I do. I don't like what they've done with the place.
I have a couple of rapid fire questions. You don't
All right.
have to think about this at all. And then I know we have a couple of questions from the audience too. Okay. Who's the most underestimated living person in tech?
Laurene Powell jobs.
That's funny.
No, you are doing. I must point. I don't understand. She's doing a lot of amazing stuff quietly. I think quiet.
Thank you.
I have to say, some of your projects are really astonishing.
But this is really not a fishing question.
All right. Okay. Who's the most doing amazing things?
No, the most underestimated living person in tech.
Underestimated. That's a good question. I gotta say Tim Cook. Here's why. And Satya Nadella, I put them together in a lot of ways. When Steve died, everyone was like, it was curtains. I never think it's curtains. He built a team. And one of the things Steve said to me, which it was really interesting, because everyone was like, larger than life. He's the center of attention. But one time, he said to me, I said something, and he said, what do you think? I'm Willy Wonka, and everybody else is like the Oompa Loompas? It's a whole team here doing this whole thing. Which was interesting when he said that. And I think Tim Cook has 10x the value of that company.
Yeah.
He's created a lot of a lot of really great products, and to keep acting like he's a logistics manager is kind of weird. Like, do you know what I mean? He's good at logistics. I'm like, well, he's really good at logistics because that fucking
I know.
company is,
Yes, and
I mean, you must be happy about that.
He's been CEO.
but
Yeah, he's
he's really
he's been CEO for almost 13 years.
13 years, and I think it's a really he's done a nice done a nice job.
Okay, here's the next one.
All right, the other one is Satya Nadella, who's done the same thing at Microsoft. Really transformed that company into a much better company, a more ethical company.
Yeah.
Really, and then the investments they're making in OpenAI, very sharp, and for two older guys.
Big and early.
That's who I would pick. Two older guys.
Okay, who's the most overestimated living person in tech?
Elon.
Yeah, I figured. Okay, who's first on your interview wish list?
Well, I really want to interview Dolly Parton and Taylor Swift together.
Oh.
And here's why.
That's a
Let me
winner.
explain. Here's why. Because, and I've written to Tree Payne, all of them. I've written to Dolly's people.
That's a winner.
I want to enter them together because besides being songwriters, great songwriters, these are kick-ass business ladies, right?
Yeah.
Dolly Parton particularly, by the way, Taylor Swift we know, we can see what she's doing from a business point of view. Dolly
amazing.
Parton is she owns IP, she's doing all kinds of AI stuff, I understand, so I really want to talk to them. And I literally written a note that goes, listen, I could care less about your boyfriends or your sweet Kentucky home. I want to talk about your incredibly killer business sense, and I want to know business.
I don't think they could turn you down.
Yes, they have. They have. Several times. Like the person who's the PR person for Taylor Swift is really nice, Tree Payne, and she's like, ha ha, no. I probably want to interview Trump, but it's kind of I don't know. Oh. I do it at Mar-a-Lago. Listen, this is my idea. You do it at Mar-a-Lago, you get the velvet ropes, you get the audience so he feels safe. A comfy velvet couch.
No, seriously, has he turned you down?
Not yet.
No, I don't think he would.
No, he hasn't. I think I'm irresistible to him.
Yeah.
He likes to he doesn't like a tough woman. He doesn't.
He's going to try to turn you to his side.
Yeah, he's going to turn me. I'm sure that's how it's going to end up. I would ask him, the first question I'd ask him is about what happened to you as a kid?
Yeah.
And did your parents hug you much? I'm guessing no. I'd start to really bug him about that. But Esther Perel, who's a therapist, said you can't therapize a narcissist. So, I don't know. Yeah, I'd want to talk to him.
I don't know. I
He's a
think you have
consequential
skills.
figure. Yes, skills,
Yes, you got skills. Favorite Star Trek episode?
Well, Tribbles.
Obviously.
Tribbles.
Okay.
No, I like the one, I got to think, that's a good question. I like the one when Spock loses his mind and has to do the fight on that thing with Kirk, and then he cuts his chest. He always takes his shirt off, William Shatner. And I like that one. There's a fight, and he loses his mind in order to marry someone or whatever. I liked it. It was good.
Support the
really good. I just got invited on a trip with William Shatner. I may go.
Huh.
Yeah.
What?
I don't know, to the Arctic. He's going to the Arctic. And William Shatner wants you to come to the Arctic with him.
How long would it take?
I don't know.
No, don't do it. Okay.
Yeah. I'm going to call you if it goes south. Lorraine, scramble the jets. Shatner's got me trapped up here.
Be careful when you meet your heroes.
Okay.
Okay. A device you can't live without.
Oh, this.
Yeah.
I mean, really, honestly, this is the most important consequential device right now. When it came out in 2007, it changed everything. It was, there were things before it at General Magic and lots of different places, but this has been the most, it's not going to be the most consequential device, but one of the things is when my son was born, I actually had a BlackBerry in my hand, which is one of those little ones.
Yeah.
And I was texting with Walt, of course, and I was like 6 centimeters, whatever I was doing, and then I had an emergency C-section, and they rushed me in, and my brother's a doctor at this hospital, and the doctor goes, "Oh, we heard about you," because it was sitting because you've had children, I had a thing in the back.
Epidural.
Thank you. And so I didn't know it was there because I couldn't feel, because they
Wait, so you
they rushed
didn't
me
let it
in there.
go?
No, they wrapped it in plastic. Oh. So it was actually in my hand during the cesarean, and it kept buzzing, because Walt buzzing at me. And I shouldn't tell this story. I'm going to tell this story. I should not tell this story, but I did. Same thing happened with Walt when I was actually artificially inseminated. Walt called me, and he goes, "What you doing?" And I'm like, and I told him. He goes, "I'm hanging up." So I love my phone. I love my phone. I love that phone. I do.
Oh my gosh.
What's your favorite device? Yeah, what is it? What is it really? Seriously, what's your favorite device?
I like the watch a lot.
You do, yeah.
I do. But
It's a handsome-
if
handsome
I
band.
could only have one, it would definitely be the phone.
All right, let me ask you this question that people ask. It's sort of like that game you play. If you had to give up the phone, okay, let me
Or a
think.
child.
Let me think. This child? No. Well, I got a lot of them, but no. The phone, a TV, or let's see, what's the third thing? Name something else, something you wouldn't want to give up. What? Internet. Internet, phone,
Or TV?
TV.
Give up one?
No, give up, keep only one.
Oh, keep one. Wait, so you'd have the phone with no internet?
Yeah.
Or you'd have the internet and no device.
You can have a computer. Lorraine's not having it. All right, let's move on.
All right. So here's some audience questions from Tina in Washington, D.C. You could raise your hand if you're Tina. So here it is. What female executive, investor, player, well-known or unknown in the tech sphere, do you think is most underrated or hasn't been given the opportunity she deserves?
She deserves so many, so many.
Yeah, that's a good question, Tina.
You know, one of the difficulties of programming my conferences for over 20 years was trying to make sure we had a balanced thing. And at the same time, they were all they were all the big CEOs. And so many years ago, this is not the person I picked, but when Meg Whitman got to be head of HP, I called Cheryl. I said, "Now you're the second most important woman in the business." And she's like, "I'd like to be the sixth," you know, because it's really an empty space.
Yeah.
Probably, you know, people that you don't hear about. Ruth Porat at Google, I think
She's
has been
fantastic.
critically important to keeping that company in a place. There's a woman named Lisa Su who runs AMD, which is a chip company. Doesn't get nearly enough credit. You know, in a lot of ways, there's all kinds of different people. Susan Wojcicki
Yes.
just had a terrible tragedy, but she's she's been a very important player at Google, I would say. And there was someone that who died actually. Joy Covey was the CFO of Amazon.
Oh, yeah.
Was critically important to that company, and had a terrible accident. But was really critical to getting that company off the ground. There's a lot of people like that, like just. Google particularly has quite a few of really prominent women that came out of there. I'm trying to think. You know, Mary Meeker, in a lot of ways, if you want to think about it, was really important in terms of she was an analyst and then was an investment, did all kinds of things, was a venture capitalist, has been really important to that area. But you have to sit there and think. You know, you really do have to go, let me think. I think Marguerite Vestager in Europe, who is a regulator, has been important. I would say Amy Klobuchar is trying to be an important person.
Yeah, good. From Cindy in Boston, Massachusetts. I assume she's here too. What advice would you give a high school or college student who's interested in pursuing journalism today?
Oh. Work for something owned by her. It's hard because you have to be there's a couple ways this is going, which is, look, the economics have been kicked out of the whole thing. I mean, anyone understands this. And I write about it a lot in the book at the Washington Post. When classifieds died, display died, there was issues around free news. A lot of the economic underpinnings have been kicked out, and then Facebook and Google, Meta and Alphabet, whatever they call themselves, have owned digital advertising. They own it. And then they own the distribution. And one of the things that I think people don't realize is that they are media. They are, like, TikTok is entertainment. So is Instagram. So they are starting to own the distribution, the content itself, the advertising around it. So it's hard. And so there's either going to be bigger companies. There's going to be companies supported by wealthy people who don't necessarily have to make that much money. Or there's going, like Bezos or you or Mark Benioff or anyone. There's a bunch of those happening which are interesting. And they'll probably do okay. They just may not do great, right? They're not great businesses. And then the biggest one in the sector is the New York Times, which is considered the gold standard. I talk about this, but it's not very big. The New York Times is $2.4 billion in revenue. Facebook has that in a drawer somewhere, right? So what are you going to do? Now they're attacking Hollywood. Disney's not big enough now. Disney's under siege. Paramount. Warner Brothers is way down, 65%. It's not just all media. So that said, you can do really well as an entrepreneur. I've done incredibly well, if I say so myself. But there's all kinds of things like Puck, and there's, Casey Newton at Platformer. If you're Jessica Lesson at The Information, if you have a small thing where costs meet revenue, you can have these great, influential, tiny little things, podcasting. Yeah. So I would say think hard about understanding business. And I think reporters have to understand business, or else they're going to be subject to layoffs. And then there's the AI thing that's coming for so many jobs. So. Yeah. So happy times in journalism.
One last one to wrap us up from Mitchell in Rockville, Maryland. In all the years you've covered tech, what has surprised you the most?
I think understanding how much I love it still, that I still love it, and I still have hopes for it to do amazing things around climate change tech and around healthcare, the stuff around, your son is working on this. There's so much going on that tech is going to be critical to. That even, and I always joke about Elon saying multiplanetary species. We have to think about that, right? That's exciting. The ideas of the life extension and cleaning up and more equity. That, I think, I'm really still excited about. Yeah. But we really do have to start understanding we can't have enormous wealth on one side and the equity
is on the other side.
It creates a situation. And one time, many years ago, I think it was to Mark Andreessen, one of these people, I said, you're going to have to do something about income inequality, or you're going to have to armor plate your Tesla. And I looked at this person, and I thought, he wants to armor plate his Tesla, asshole. Yeah. But a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't. And the young entrepreneurs coming up now, I find very exciting. And so don't you? When you have your investor day, right? And you start to see them, and they're doing things that are much more oriented towards the world.
Yes, and common good.
And the common good. And so with the younger entrepreneurs, you do see a bit of what you talked about at the beginning, which was it was about a little bit more than money, right? Yeah. And I often say to some people that disappoint me, you're so poor, all you have is money, Yeah. And I think there's great possibilities of making this a much better world still, despite all this. And we'll see. So that's what I'm
that's
surprised
the perfect
I'm not,
note to end on.
I'm not a nasty bitch, but I am not.
Or that is. Thank you. Amazing. So good.
You're the best.
Thank you. That was great.
Thank you so much to Kara Swisher and Laurene Powell.